Thank. We'll be recording today's meeting. So just so you know that, we record it and we'll put it up on the website. Thanks, folks, for spending some time with us today. My name's David Plum, and I'll just help to facilitate today's meeting, today's webinar. Let me say a few things as we're getting going. We're all together in one big Zoom room, which means good Zoom etiquette is essential. Keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. If you'd like to be on camera, please do be. We also have some interpretation today. We had a request for ALS, sign language interpretation. And one of the things that means is for all of us who'll be speaking today, and if you as members of the public will be asking questions, is to just speak slowly and don't speak over each other. So we just have one person speaking at a time. So to get us going, I'm going to turn us over to Jane Lazorchak, who's director of Vermont's Climate Action Office. And Jane's going to introduce some of the key people on the call, and then we'll get going with the content. So Jane, over to you.
Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on your lunch hour this Thursday afternoon. We're really excited to be able to bring forward what has been more than a year and a half worth of work, led by both the Climate Action Office within the Agency of Natural Resources, in partnership with the Treasurer's Office, to bring forward a vision for a resilience implementation strategy in Vermont. I wanted to introduce both Marion Wools and Evan Horn, who will be guiding you through the details of that work today and leading the presentation. And then also take a moment to introduce you to Secretary Moore and Treasurer Pichek, who we are really grateful to be joined today by, in order to introduce you all with some welcoming remarks and set the stage for why the state felt like this was needed on the heels of some of our recent flooding, the drought that we've been in this year, and how we look to take some actionable steps to move us forward in helping build both resilience, making Vermont's communities and natural and working land stronger to support all the good things that we value living in Vermont. So without further ado, and understanding that we also want to have ample time to hear from all of you today with your questions and concerns, next steps, I want to turn it over to Secretary Moore to kick us off and welcome you all here today.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I second Jane's thanks to you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this conversation. And this work has really stretched over the last 18 months, and it found its genesis in the flooding that took place during the summer of 2023. But throughout the last 2.5 years, Vermont really has faced a series of climate-related disasters. So the floods in 23 and 24, the drought conditions that are currently prevalent throughout much of Vermont, high heat, wildland fires that have taken place both here in Vermont, and air quality impacts from much larger fires that have burned elsewhere. And the sum total effect of all of those things is it really lays bare that our climate is already changing, and those changes are threatening Vermonters' health, safety, quality of life, and economic security. And the most difficult part is that there are likely new challenges we haven't encountered in the past and that will need to continue to expand our view. This brings me to one of my favorite climate writers, Dr. Kate Marvel, who's a professor at Columbia University. And a quote from Dr. Marvel that's particularly resonated with me is that we have to do something, but it does not follow that we should settle for simply anything. I see this sentiment as getting at the core of the resilience implementation strategy, recognizing there's a critical need to act both quickly and with intention, but we also need to prioritize those efforts to ensure we are meeting a challenge in the way that is efficient in its use of money and projects. Being able to prioritize our work effectively requires thinking across the broad sweep of potential climate impacts, including ecological, social, and economic. The team is going to walk you through the approach they followed in compiling a comprehensive list of existing programs and efforts that state government here in Vermont is already engaged in to improve resilience, identify gaps between those existing efforts, and then some of the solutions or the approaches they're developing to help fill those gaps. So again, before I pitch it over to Treasurer Pichak, I just want to offer my thanks for taking time to learn more about the resilience implementation strategy, the priorities state government will be pursuing, and opportunities for all of you to become more involved in that work. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to the Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary Moore, and good to see everybody this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll echo Julie's thanks to her team and my team here at the Treasurer's Office for working the last 18 months to get this climate resiliency implementation strategy finalized and produced. I really appreciate it. And to Julie's point, I think it's really important that this work was done for all the reasons that she said. I think it was important that this work was done in a cooperative, bipartisan way between the Treasurer's Office and the Governor's administration. This is an issue that we can get broad agreement on, that it needs to be addressed. And it's also something that has really long-term needs. It's not something we can solve overnight. And some of the challenges will evolve over time and maybe get even more significant over time. So we're going to have to continue to address and readdress the strategy. But it's something that we can all agree needs to be implemented, and we need to take our first steps on it. And we also need to make sure it's a living document that we readdress as we move forward. You know, on the resiliency piece, and this group more than anybody would know all of the reasons we need to focus on having a more resilient state and more resilient economy, more resilient communities when it comes to climate change. But when you think about the impact that the floods have had on individual families, families that have been wiped out financially from climate disasters, but also wiped out emotionally from climate disasters, losing their home, losing family heirlooms, losing things that are precious to them. There's certainly a financial cost to individuals that are impacted by climate disasters, but there's also an emotional toll that's really quite hard to capture, but in some ways is even more significant than the money that has been lost. There's certainly a significant economic impact to Vermont. You think about the direct hit of a climate disaster on small businesses. The Small Business Administration estimates that 40% of businesses that are hit by a climate disaster will never reopen. They estimate that upwards of 90% will not be able to survive more than 2 years after the climate disaster has struck their business. So it really speaks to the need for us to protect those families and protect those businesses, because we want to try to prevent the climate disaster from reaching their doorstep to begin with. The other thing on the economy and on the impact that we have to be mindful of is that a lot of the climate disasters we have seen here in Vermont have disproportionately impact rural areas of our state. So when you think about those rural communities that their economy is not as strong as Chittenden County, Burlington, they're getting that double impact of being hit by a climate disaster and trying to recover, while largely Chittenden County and Burlington have been spared those flooding disaster impacts that we've seen in the last few summers. So it's really mindful of thinking about the need to invest in our rural communities when we're talking about resiliency. And then we also want to make sure, Vermont maintains this idea that is out there that we are in the future going to be a climate haven for our residents and potentially new residents that are going to want to move to Vermont. I think that's still the case when you look at some of the impacts of climate change across the other parts of the country. But here in Vermont, we have serious work to do to become more climate resilient and maintain that reputation. And then lastly, as treasurer, it's just simply a good investment. There's a lot of different research and analysis out there, but FEMA estimates that every dollar we spend in resiliency, we will save $6 in disaster recovery. So whether we're talking about taxpayer dollars, the impact on families, the impact on our economy, building a strategy for making our state more resilient to climate change has profound beneficial impacts, and couldn't be happier working with Julie and her team to get our blueprint out, and look forward to discussing it today. And look forward to working with everybody on its implementation.
Thanks so much, Treasurer Pichak, and Secretary Moore. So let me just say a little bit how we're going to handle the call today. Jane's team, Marion in particular, will take the next 15, 20 minutes, walk us through some core pieces of what this resilience implementation strategy is. Then we'll take a break for some clarifying questions that you might have. And I'll put the emphasis on questions, like what questions you have for Marion and the team about what this thing is. We then have a little bit more information to share about cost and about financing options. And then after that, we're going to do some interactive exercises around priorities, any clarifying thoughts you might have. We'll have some chance just for some Q&A and general discussion. And we're going to try to finish up around 1:15-ish for today's call. All right. So first up is going to be Marion, who's going to give us this 15, 20 minutes presentation, clarifying questions, a little bit more information, and then let's get into a broader discussion. All right. So let me pass it over to Marion, and we'll pull the slides back up. And over to you. Thanks so much, Marion.
Great. Thanks so much, David. We're going to pull some slides up here just a moment, but while that's happening, thank you again to Secretary Moore and Treasurer Pichak for the introduction to the Resilience Implementation Strategy. As David said, my name is Marion. I work in the Climate Action Office. I'm our Resilience and Adaptation Coordinator and was part of the team working to pull together this strategy. So this resilience implementation strategy is the result of an 18-month effort that was announced by the governor and the treasurer, with Secretary Moore leading on behalf of the governor early in 2024. The intent of this strategy is to build off years of work done across state government to build resilience to the impacts of climate change. We know that climate change is making storms more frequent and severe, but it's also making things like droughts, invasive species, extreme temperatures, much more regular occurrences that we and our communities are feeling. All of these impacts of climate change, from the storms, those acute events, to slower moving hazards like droughts and invasive species, are impacting our daily lives, our communities, and many of the things we value about Vermont. The development of this strategy was intended to complement Vermont's climate action plan by really focusing on how state government, through the work and authorities and programs that we can provide, can strengthen Vermont's ability to prepare for and recover from the impacts of climate change. It's also intended to complement other state plans that focus on climate resilience and really build up and lift up priorities through those efforts. Our goal with this strategy is to identify both the actions we can take now and funding pathways that can be utilized to make implementation possible. We kicked off this work early in 2024 with public meetings, and the Climate Action Office, in partnership with the Treasurer's Office and a steering committee made up of representatives from many agencies and departments, worked to develop this strategy over the last 18 months. We included and focused on extensive cross-government assessments to identify work that is happening and where there were gaps and opportunities to scale up that work with a focus on climate resilience. We held a hands-on workshop with over 100 government entities, nonprofits, and regional community partners, and developed a vision informed by Vermonters, many folks on this call, through public input that really guided and helped us align the priorities identified in this strategy. Next slide, please. So as Treasurer Pichak and Secretary Moore noted, we are feeling extreme impacts of climate change across our communities, our infrastructure, our natural communities, and the systems by which we rely on for goods and services and our livelihoods in Vermont. We spoke with Vermonters about their priorities for climate resilience at community gatherings around the state and looked at more than 25 different existing reports and plans that showed Vermonters' views on various climate resilience topics. We integrated all of that work and assessment of climate resilience priorities from Vermonters into a vision that really guided this process. This resulted in the identification of 6 core components, and you'll see icons up on the screen to reflect those. These reflect the interconnected systems that make our Vermont resilient, You can think of these as our subject areas or broad buckets that the priority actions in the strategy fall under, and I'll walk through those here on the slide. The first, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen here, is community-centric approach. This is really focused on actions that really help protect and support our human health and well-being, and focus on things like our mental health and our support systems that really help our communities be resilient through the people and the community structures on which we support. There are actions under this core component focused on how we plan as communities and regions in the state. There are actions focused on how we emphasize and build community engagement to support decision-making around climate resilience and uncertainty. The next core component is focused on our early warning systems and ensuring we have a fast, effective response to the impacts of climate change. We, through this process, are defining resilience as both our ability to implement long-term risk reduction actions and adaptation strategies, but also our ability to respond quickly and recover quickly from the impacts of climate change. Actions under this core component focus on enabling Vermonters to better quickly anticipate and swiftly respond to climate-related disasters. Under the next core component, focused on economic and environmental sustainability, there are actions that speak to how we better support our businesses and our natural and working lands enterprises in adapting to changing climate conditions. Impacts like floods, droughts, wildfires are having dramatic impacts on our farmers, on our forestry operations, and other working lands enterprises, and how we support them directly relates to the economic resilience of our state. Under the infrastructure sector, our next icon here, we're really focused on roads, bridges, water treatment facilities, power lines, and other communication services, how those can be designed, assessed, reinforced, and discussed about in ways that help us build resilience to the impacts of climate change. The next core component is focused on our nature-based solutions. These include actions related to safeguarding our ecosystems, protecting and repairing our biodiversity, and also utilizing nature-based solutions to buffer our communities from extreme weather events. We know that these solutions often provide myriad co-benefits and can really be some of the best opportunities by which we support natural communities and systems that then help buffer our built environment from the impacts of climate change. The last core component is really focused on tying those previous 5 all together. We call this one government systems, and it's often invisible. It speaks to the systems we have in place through state government to support Vermonters, to support communities, and really the nuts and bolts of how we get work done. Perhaps it's the financing or technical assistance of programs on which you rely, and all of this helps tie together the previous 5 components that we focused on. Taken together, all of these create a framework that addresses both the physical and social dimensions of resilience. Again, everything from our roads and rivers to our communications networks and our ecological communities and community well-being. These capture how we define resilience. Again, we are defining resilience for this strategy as the ability of our interconnected ecological, social, and economic systems to be able to anticipate, adapt, withstand, respond, and thrive in the face of current and future conditions related to climate change. Next slide, please. So after months of work and analysis focused on the development of this strategy, again, through collaborative work with partners from across state government, focused on how we can really scale up the work of state government through an assessment of opportunities and gaps to build resilience to the impacts of climate change. Through that collaboration, we resulted and sort of led to the outcomes of this strategy. We generated hundreds of ideas and prioritized those to 121 final recommended actions that make up this resilience implementation strategy. We prioritized actions based on practicability, impact, and the timing of benefits, and the ability of us to implement those through programs, implementers, and opportunities across state government. A little more than half of those 121 actions are what we call Tier 1 priorities. These are high urgency and actions that have a high readiness for implementation now and are steps we can really move forward in the near term. The other half are what we call Tier 2 priorities, which are still very important, but may be a little less urgent or require some additional planning and collaboration before they're ready to be implemented. The priority actions in this strategy range from quick wins to long-term systems change, and they span all 6 of those core components I spoke to on the last slide. The actions included in the strategy aren't just vague goals, they're pretty specific, measurable steps that we can take and implement to build resilience. And I'll flag again and note that this strategy doesn't intend to replace existing plans. Rather, it looks to connect those across state government, identifying gaps in funding needs so that we can more quickly and efficiently move forward on implementation. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you all through just a sample of some of those priority actions that came out of this process. And within the sample of actions, we'll really lift up some priorities that we're looking to move forward this year. Before I do that, I want to point you to where on our website you can see these actions listed. So I believe Evan will eventually, when he gets to it, put a link in the chat so folks can explore it. There it is. Thanks, Evan. On our website, each prioritized action is included as a card. So you can see the rectangles. I have 2 examples at the bottom of the screen here. Each is listed under the core component or that bucket of work that I spoke to earlier. The tier 1 or tier 2 that the action was prioritized within is indicated in the right-hand corner of that card. Each action was also assigned a lead from state government. This lead may not be the only entity responsible for implementation, but allowed us to identify a lead agency or department that might have subject matter expertise, relevant authority, or real relationships with partners on the ground to best implement and move that action forward. For many of the priority actions, the Treasurer's Office worked to estimate an implementation cost associated with it. I'll speak more to what that process looked like a little bit later, but you can see estimated costs included on the cards as well, either as one-time costs or as ongoing needs. Next slide, please. So I'll now share just a handful of examples of actions included in the strategy. Again, these demonstrate high priority actions that cut across those 6 core components and hopefully serve as a basis and a framework for you all to understand what actions are included in the strategy here. I'll preface this by saying the sample of actions that we're going to show are intended to demonstrate the overall resilience implementation strategy as a living document. We intend to adjust this and think and revisit priorities year after year, and acknowledge that with our changing climate change and the changing hazards which we experience, this strategy will need to evolve and be able to capture ongoing needs as we revise and implement it. As new hazards arise and our needs evolve, we're going to have to evolve this strategy as well. You can pull up the bullets here, Evan. Perfect. So I have 3 examples that fall within, we will have time for questions. Thanks, Val. We'll have time after I walk through these sample actions. So under government systems, sort of the last bucket that I spoke to in my introduction of the 6 areas which we're focused on, we have 3 example actions to share with you all. The first is identifying sustainable long-term funding for a program called the Flood Resilient Communities Fund. This, also known as the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund, helps design and implement local and regional climate change adaptation projects and community resilience building. Funding through this program has historically been used as local match for federal funding that comes through the Federal Emergency Management Agency for hazard mitigation. But funding from this can also be used to support projects that can't be funded through FEMA that maybe don't meet those eligibility thresholds. The second action we're highlighting here is securing dedicated funding to expand something called the Municipal Climate Recovery Fund. This is a program that's designed to provide municipal budgetary relief in flood recovery efforts by lowering the costs of borrowing to bridge FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency reimbursement, or otherwise pay for unexpected costs related to flooding. And the last sample action we'll show here is work that's being moved forward currently to develop a public education campaign to share and talk about the importance of flood insurance with Vermonters. We know that flood insurance brings a lot of benefits and also has hurdles, and want to be able to share and concisely talk about flood insurance, how to assess your risk, how to assess the needs with Vermonters across the state. And this is work that's being led through the Department of Financial Regulation and the Department of Environmental Conservation. Next bullet. Under the community-centric approach sector, one example action we're sharing here is focused on on-the-ground support for regional partners, municipalities, health and residential care facilities to prepare for and respond to climate hazards that directly affect our human health. We know that as we start to see warmer days, higher increases of bad air quality due to wildfire smoke, the direct impacts we're going to see on our public health and human health in our communities will increase. So our ability to be able to directly support partners that are doing that on the ground work for human health is an important priority for us in this strategy. Next slide, please. So under the bucket of our early warning systems and our fast, effective response, we have 3 actions to highlight for you here. The first is focused on a targeted outreach campaign, really focused on how we support underserved populations across Vermont to gain access to emergency information and alerts. The second action is focused on expanding our capacity to conduct tabletop exercises or sort of practice sessions on dam safety with our state, municipal, and utility partners. And the last is focused on conducting studies of our rivers and water movement within to better understand how our floods shift our riverbeds and how we can better protect our populated places near those changing rivers. Under the bucket of economic and environmental sustainability, one highlighted action here for you is sustainable funding for the Farm and Forestry Operations Security Special Fund. This fund is intended to focus on how we can directly support and cover losses for our farmers and our forestry sectors to better support recovery from things like drought, wildfires, floods, and snap freezes. Next slide, please. Under the infrastructure sector, one action to highlight here for you all is a focus on developing a capital program climate guide intended to support municipalities in thinking long-term about how they plan for climate impacts on their infrastructure and their capital assets. As we start to see or are already seeing increases in the severity and frequency of our climate disasters and the direct impact that that has on our roadways and other capital and municipal infrastructure budgets, being able to think long-term about how to incorporate climate change considerations into that infrastructure and capital planning is an important part of this strategy. Under the core component of nature-based solutions, 2 actions we are highlighting. The first is focused on implementing a user fee for access to state lands that would fund ongoing conservation, restoration, and climate resilience practices on those lands. And the second is really focused on quantifying the co-benefits of water quality projects for climate resilience. This would ultimately be used in service of really maximizing existing and different funding streams across the state that may be focused on water quality for the co-benefits of climate resilience projects. So those are just a handful of actions that we wanted to share to illustrate the breadth of what's needed and what is included and prioritized in this strategy. They range from financial tools to community outreach and technical assistance, and we hope to give you a sample of what's included in the strategy within. And with that, David, I think I'll hand it back to you to facilitate questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Marion. Okay, so as I mentioned, and if you're just joining us, we're going to take a pause here and ask some clarifying questions if you have them. We'll take like 10 minutes or so and do that. And then Marion's got a little bit more information about cost and financing. So hang on for that. But if you have some questions, this is a good time. In your Zoom screen, you can raise your hand. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a raised hand function. That's the way to get our attention, and we can call on you. We do have ALS interpretation if someone needs that. So let me just go through hands first. I see Patricia is up first, and Patricia, over to you.
Thank you, and I apologize because I haven't read the website, but I noticed the emphasis on education for helping people understand climate change. Where did you put that? Public education on the plan on the importance of flood insurance specifically. Have you discussed public education generally about climate change and their effects? I'm speaking specifically about all we got to do is dredge the river people to help them understand, what these climate hazards are and what the best way to respond. Has that been discussed?
That great question. Yes, that comes up regularly in conversations. I will say even broader than just through the resilience implementation strategy, but that's a core piece of the work that our Climate Action Office does, is engagement with Vermonters around climate change and coordinating with partners across state government around solutions and answering questions like what you raised about dredging and the places where that can and should be used. So I think I'll broadly say that education, discussion with Vermonters around climate change is a core component of our office's work, and certainly came up in discussions around the resilience implementation strategy. That example action of the flood insurance campaign to help people understand their risk and what options are available to them is sort of just one example of that. I could go back and look. I don't think we had a specific action focused on broad education broadly, or on education broadly, again, as that's a core component of our office's work already. Great question.
I just might add, is that one of the benefits of the resilience implementation strategy is it was really intended to complement and leverage other climate plans that are developed in our state, including the most recent adopted climate action plan, which the Climate Council adopted on July 1st of 2025. And there is a large emphasis in that plan on pathways, strategies, and actions geared towards education and how to think about educational opportunities around climate action at all levels, from early education all the way up through tech centers. And so this plan really does build upon that and think specifically about the needs around resilience and adaptation.
Thanks, Jane. That's great. Evan, could you drop the slides as we do the next couple questions? That'd be great. Over to you, Val, and I think Trudy Gilbert will be voicing any question you have, Val, but over to you, Val Hughes.
And Val is asking, okay, are you ready to interpret? Can you see me okay? Great. Okay, so hi, this is Val Hughes. I'm from Independent Living Program. And I just wanted to expand on that because I think that this education has to be accessible for the deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing communities. Unfortunately, there's quite a disparity in access to all of these programs. So many deafblind and hard of hearing individuals live, very isolated. And especially with our current administration, that is just getting, much more complicated for individuals to be able to gain access to this type of information, like Liz, directly when it comes to the warning and how to minimize your risk and what are your options available. And even getting that direct information, is really difficult. So we need to, as a state, commit to having all of this accessible for all Vermonters, for blind people, for deafblind people, for deaf people, for hard of hearing people. Everything has to be 100% accessible because deaf people need to know how to approach all of these impacts of climate change and all of the options that are available to them to help them to know how to minimize their risk. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Val. I appreciate that. And if there's anything to say, Jane, Marion, quickly, or Evan on that to follow up on Val's good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Well, I just thank Val for the question and note we're excited. I think there's been some work already. Val has connected with Sophie, who leads engagement work out of our office, to do some basic vlogs around promoting even just this event to start to expand our outreach to folks who might be deaf or hard of hearing. I will note there were a number of recommendations in the strategy that focus on how we better get communications channels in place through trusted networks in communities to better share emergency alert information, but also information about climate resilience programs and projects. There are actions in the resilience strategy that really focus on how we partner with networks of local organizations to receive real-time sensitive alerts and relay through trusted channels, how we use and pilot alternative platforms, maybe like WhatsApp or Facebook or other texting groups to deliver emergency alerts. So I think there's a lot of thinking in that, and sounds like we're aligned, Val, in your priority in thinking about that as well.
Thanks, Marion. Okay, let's do a few more hands. I'm going to go to Nathaniel and then I'll grab one in the chat. Nathaniel, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marion, and to all the other presenters. Nathaniel Eisen, I'm a freelance climate journalist. I think my question for this section is, have all the agencies identified as lead agencies for these various actions already affirmatively indicated that they are willing to take on that responsibility?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Nathaniel. And as Marion spoke to at the beginning, the work was overseen and governed by a steering committee that was comprised of all the implementers who are referenced then around the actions developed in the plan. And they were all party to considering and bringing forward those actions to lift up into the resilience strategy. How we think about and move those forward over the next few years will require agencies affirmatively finding time and capacity to move them forward. But they've all been coordinated closely with those agencies, and those agencies have all expressed an interest in continuing to have those conversations to move those forward.
Thanks. There was a raised hand in the chat. Caroline, let me jump over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for presenting. Of course, this concept of a resilient Vermont holds a lot of promises, especially for the agricultural sector. I'm with Rural Vermont. I'm the legislative director there and a small farmer from Tunbridge myself. I guess my question is, how does this strategy recommend to protect farmland from development and to make farmland affordable for farmers? Since the 6 years I'm in my position, I have not heard once the governor mention agriculture in one of his state of the state addresses, and instead promulgates the state has to grow, similar to Chittenden. We have an Act 181 implementation for future land use in the state, and it's what it does is a Pac-Man approach to eat up farmland. And I'm a commissioner myself in my local regional planning commission, and we just yesterday discussed a draft future land use map where agricultural land is not delineated in contrast to the mandated statute to do so. And I guess this whole concept reads more like an investment portfolio, but that's not what beginning farmers need. We need land access and we need farmland to be more affordable through changes in policy. So does the governor have an idea about that?
Thank you for that comment. And I think this is a great time to introduce Evan Horn, who's our Resilient Lands Coordinator within the Climate Action Office, and thinking heavily about how we invest in natural and working land solutions to build resilience. And Evan, you've come off mute, so it'd be great to speak to some of the recommendations in the RIS.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your question, Caroline. Just recognizing, all the different plans and strategies that are happening across the state, especially 30 by 30 and 50 by 50. That bit doesn't necessarily fall into here. We do have several actions that speak to expanding farmland acquisition for historically underserved, new entry and small scale farmers, and other actions about succession programs and making sure that we are, directly matching farmers and forest landowners with the new generation of producers. So that was definitely front of mind, protecting our food systems, our local food systems here in Vermont, and making sure that farms remain economically viable and a part of Vermont's future.
Thanks, Evan. Let's take a couple more questions and then I'd love to switch to the conversation about costs and financing. Jessica? Jessica Norton, over to you.
I didn't see it, no. Hello, my name is Jessica. I am deaf. And I did want to add a suggestion. I thought it would be great if we could have, a different app that would be specific to having communication access for deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing individuals. I think something that, especially when it comes to something with warning, we need to have our own alert system because the one that is set for people that can hear is not working for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing individuals too. And we could definitely collaborate together so we could make sure that we are receiving that information in a timely and accessible manner. I mean, I'm a deaf woman, I'm a mother of children, and I need to have timely access to that important information. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks for that comment and specific suggestion.
Well, David, if I could just quickly jump in, really appreciate that, Jessica. And I think excited to hear everyone's thoughts and feedback on both maybe where you're, seeing some additional gaps that you would like the strategy to focus on, but also I think I shared to Val's question, there is an action related to how we really evaluate and pilot the use of alternative platforms to get out emergency alerts. And so thinking about how we actually implement that action with partners such as yourself, who really have an in and a connection with certain populations who may not utilize something like VT Alert, is exactly where we want to go to as we start to think about implementing these actions. So really appreciate that comment there.
Great. Thanks, Marion. Last question from Margaret.
Hi, I'm the director of the Charlotte Library, and I'm part of a Sustainable Libraries Working Group. And I think as a place to get some of that public education, I just hope that you'll think of libraries as a place to have that happen. And one of the things that libraries have been working on across the country, and certainly here in Vermont, is making information accessible to a variety of people. So, again, I hope that we could help get the information out to as many people in as many ways as possible. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Margaret. It's nice to have so many offers of collaboration and help. That's wonderful. There was one question in the chat, I'll just say, which was, how will progress on these strategies be tracked? Marion or Jane or Evan, is there something you're going to talk about later, or do you want to grab that question right now?
Marion's going to speak to the next steps with how we're going to monitor and assess the resilience strategy itself towards the end of the presentation once she goes through costs. So I'll defer that component of the question to Marion, which I know she'll get to. And I'll just say second, one of the core components of the Climate Action Office, as Marion was also speaking to, beyond the programmatic work we do around cutting climate pollution, investing in resilience and adaptation, we also are very much invested in supporting communications, community engagement, and then finally thinking about how we measure and track progress over time across state government, to think about how we better account for and communicate to decision makers the tools and levers that we're pulling and how those are impacting our climate goals. And that's a process that we're actually about to embark on. We did phase 1 of that project to scale and scope what those metrics are related to climate action. And we are now in the process of thinking about how we stand up that tool with the resources within our office. So a little bit of a stay tuned, but for now, I will drop in the chat the link to that, that measuring and assessing progress, now being called the Climate Action Tracker Tool website, where you can learn more about that in progress.
Thanks, Jane. Okay. Well, why don't we head back, Marion, to your slides and a quick conversation about funding and financing.
Great, thanks, David. I think Evan's going to pull the slide back up. But as he does that, I'll just share and sort of echo some of the comments from both Secretary Moore and the Treasurer. We know climate change is costly to Vermont. As Secretary Moore noted, the July 23 and 24 flooding alone resulted in almost $1 billion worth of damage. But we also know that investing in building resilience comes at a cost as well. That being said, to highlight something that the Treasurer included in his remarks, We also know that investing in climate resilience measures pays off in the long run. Research has shown that $1 invested in climate adaptation yields anywhere from 6 up to 13. I've seen some studies that show up to 21 or $22, depending on the sector, in savings when we are hit by a disaster. In addition to cost savings related to climate damages and disasters, investing and building resilience also means our communities will feel more connected, will be healthier, and will be more prepared to deal with any types of shocks and stressors. So we both know that climate change is costing our state. Investments in adaptation and resilience will cost as well, but we will see long-term cost savings and other co-benefits related to that level of investment. Understanding the costs needed to build resilience through this strategy really allows us to prioritize investments and think about and be strategic on the actions we take to adapt to climate change. To the question around how are we going to measure and track progress, I think this prioritization, together with our look at practicability and impact and urgency, but also at the cost associated with actions, really helps us assess year over year where to place our efforts and to really focus on building resilience across the state. The Treasurer's Office, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Treasurer's Office today, as Ashlyn, Director of Policy over there, couldn't join us, but they did a behemoth amount of work to take a look at the 121 actions that were prioritized and start to assign estimated implementation costs associated with a number of those actions. They did this by looking at those 121 actions and dividing them into sort of 6 broad financial buckets. 3 of them that they really used to prioritize actions that they focused on for estimated costing, you can see up on the slide here, the first 3 bullets on the left. They then worked to cost out actions that fell into these 3 categories. Actions that may be called directly for a funding or financing source. I gave some examples of those actions earlier, the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, the Municipal Climate Recovery Fund, and some others. They also focused on actions that really identified an immediate disaster response or recovery need, and also those that focused on the evaluation of risk and high-value mitigation plans. Of the 121 actions that were prioritized across both Tier 1 and Tier 2, 48 currently have cost estimates for implementation associated with them. These are actions that either require new funding sources or have clear ongoing needs associated with their implementation over time. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that the Treasurer's Office estimated for the actions that they were able to assess for one-time funds, about $270 million in estimated one-time funds for implementation. These represent 2025 dollars that can be allocated over multiple fiscal years, but really indicate and show the needed one-time investment to lift up these projects and priorities, pilots particular programs, think about investments in our alert systems, for example. There was also an estimated ongoing need associated with a number of actions, and that estimated need came out to about $95 million in 2025 dollars. The Treasurer's Office looked at ongoing need over a 30-year time horizon and associated a 2.5% inflation escalator with the implementation costs that would be associated at year 1 over the 30-year time horizon. I should note these estimated costs are not direct budgetary requests. Rather, they provide us a realistic estimated picture of what it would take to protect Vermont's people, our infrastructure, economy, and natural resources from the impacts of climate change. And we hope really provides us a good starting point to think about prioritization of actions, both at the individual level with individual costs associated, but then the overall picture of need that's demonstrated through this strategy. And I'll hand it back to you, David.
Super. All right. Thanks, Marion. And just to be clear, Marion, as you mentioned, that's the sort of estimated cost. It's not a specific commitment or a budget that's been put forward. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's really an exercise in estimating the cost associated with these priority actions to start a conversation around what it might take for investment. But as I said, not a direct budgetary ask or budget line.
Great. Okay. Thanks. All right, so what we wanted to do now is, again, we've been asking folks in the summer and the fall and some of the events in these 6 areas, where do you see the most need? And where you sit in Vermont and what your role is, you may have different answers to this. And we prepared just a little Zoom survey type thing to just get a flavor. Again, we're just, whoever's on this call is going to be the sample size of this, but we'd be just curious as state government tries to get its head around how to prioritize some of these actions and insert them in budget requests. What does it look like? So my colleague Mira is going to launch a little Zoom poll here. Again, this is not scientific. It's taking the pulse of who's here on the call, and it's going to ask you to rank like from not a priority to the highest priority. So 1 would be not a priority, 5 would be the highest priority. For each of these 6, how would you judge them? Are all of them a 5? All of them are the highest priority? Are some a little bit less, some a little bit more? So go ahead and take a moment in these 6 buckets of actions that Marion walked us through, and we have a little bit of examples of what those were, just to remind you. Like, which one rise up to a 5, the most highest priority? Which ones are like, this bucket is more like a 4 or a 3? Take a moment. We'll give everyone just a second to express an opinion. I'm interested in taking a pulse here with this group of folks. Again, not scientific, but taking the pulse of who's here in the room. I can see folks voting away. Thank you so much. Almost 20, over 20 of you have answered this question. That's great. Thank you so much. We'll let it run just for a second more. Again, 5 is the highest priority. 1 would be not so much a priority. Great. And Caroline, I see your comment in the chat. Thank you. Again, it's more to get everyone's minds thinking about these different areas of action. And maybe that's all the same. Maybe it's not for you. But curious for the folks who showed up for this call, when you put your mind to it, what would be a highest priority? All right, we're almost, it slowed right down. Last chance, folks. All right. Mira, why don't we go ahead and show the results of what we have? All right, so you'll see the same thing I can see here, and you might need to scroll down on your own screens. I'm not quite sure how this shares for you. It might be a little different. I'm just looking through and I'm trying to see where there's the highest level of priorities, just out of curiosity. And when I scroll down through my screen, certainly infrastructure design and reinforcement rises up to the top clearly for folks. That's the number 4 bucket, right? That clearly shows as something that is a very high priority. Other ones have some similar priority levels. Some pop up a little bit higher, like the early warning systems seems to get a lot of attention. And others as well, the community-centric approach, good attention. Okay. Again, just trying to get everybody's head in the game here about what this really is and the fact that Vermont's going to need to make some choices about how to invest wisely in resilience. Okay. So we could stop sharing that. Thank you. This is a chance to do a little bit more Q&A and discussion around this, particularly if you have questions about the funding and financing that Marion just said and other things that folks think are important. I'm noticing Secretary Moore put in the chat she couldn't see the results. So hopefully folks can see those results. You can scroll through on your own. All right. Nathaniel, I'm going to come back to you in just a second. I'm going to grab 2 hands that I haven't heard from yet, and then I'll come back to you if that's all right. Let me go to Thomas first. So Thomas, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Thomas Gallanet. I'm the town administrator in Johnson, Vermont. I'm also a 7th generation farmer on a 200-year-old family farm. And all of those places are struggling with the increasing weather events, right? And I think one of the questions I have is in all of these aspects, we're all kind of in silos where we have to make decisions based on the unknown of these increasing weather events, right? And so we're doing it as a family, we're doing it as a road crew, we're doing it as a select board, and we're doing it as a community. And we're doing it with Vermont Emergency Management, and we're doing it with the IRC. Thank you, Eric Filcorn, for being here, right? And it's and we're doing it at the state, and we're doing it here now with the Climate Action Office. And so, how do we, as a community, as a state, like where do these ideas go up and go down? And so, and I think about that with investment in infrastructure. Here in Johnson, we've made some policy decisions where we now are going above and beyond the municipal roads general permit. We're putting nothing smaller than 24-inch cross tubes in and nothing smaller than 18-inch drive culverts. And so what that did is it increased our water carrying capacity by more than 50%. And so even though we've had 3 of our top 5 floods on record, the last 2 after that implementation had 0 FEMA-worthy events. And each of them only cost a couple $100s. And so how can we use examples like this that were made at very small levels to then use state policy to direct the rest of the state or get those ideas out of those silos and into the larger picture? And is that through the Climate Action Office? Is it through Vermont Emergency Management, the IRC? Where do the ideas go from here, right?
I'm so happy with that question, Thomas. I'm going to push that over to Jane if you want to say anything, Jane, about how you see the role of the Climate Action Office and these other state entities in lifting up this good practice and doing this work.
Yeah, the idea, I'll just continue to state and we'll say again and again, and that we have not figured out the perfect suite of this yet, but the resilience strategy was an attempt at starting to do this, and then we in state government must have carry it forward, is understanding and appreciating that there are a lot of both state agencies working in the space and a lot of climate plans that are striving to address different sectors around climate action. And the resilience strategy really did try to first and foremost understand and assess what government's already doing, what plans are already addressing as needed actions and recommendations, and then striving to sync those up to really identify the highest and best opportunities for state government to invest in. Our Climate Action Office we sit within the Agency of Natural Resources, but our job is really to coordinate and amplify climate action across state government. And we are overseen and advised by an interagency advisory board with all of the actors in cross-state government who have a stake in climate solutions. And so we meet at a minimum quarterly and continue to strive to think about how we better integrate that work across government, how we better integrate plans and work to find efficiencies. And that carries forward in at many levels, but not the least of which in amplifying communications and messages and things that are working on the ground so that we can double down on those things and speak to those as examples across both government and then across the state through municipal action and work like you are doing and leading on in Johnson. And I was grateful that Evan actually dropped in the chat a few chats ago the Municipal Climate Toolkit, which also strives to provide those resources firsthand to municipalities to think about how you leverage programs, projects, funding to do the good work that you're doing to mitigate the impacts of climate change so that as you invest in the infrastructure and beyond, we can also see those good benefits play dividends into the future as more climate hazards occur in our state.
Thanks, Jane. And for someone like Thomas, interacting with your office is a good touch point on these issues.
That's great. And at the end, I expect we have a slide that will do this, but if not, we can, on her behalf, Sophie Beltrop, who's our communications lead in our office, who wasn't able to join us today on a much needed vacation, we have an e-newsletter and other ways that you can learn more about the work, both within the Climate Action Office and then across state government around climate solutions. And we can make sure folks here have the opportunity to sign up for that and learn about other avenues to engage with state government in this work.
Thanks, Jane. Okay. I'm going to grab Lori If you still have a question, Lori, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Tom, thanks for your question. I thought that was great. Knowing, that Working Lands Initiative Board is part of the ANR and funding for farming and access to farmland are some ways that we see climate action moving in the state around working lands is one thing. In looking at, first off, I want to thank your office for putting together this strategy. It was really great to flip through it and see so much information contained in such a digestible format. I'm kind of curious, when we look at the funding need across all of these strategies you've laid out, we have the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grants were cut and clawed back by the federal government. Anything with green energy or climate efficiency is being clawed back or cut. Those are resilience activities that are funded by our federal government. And I think education about how those funding cuts at the federal level are really important to communicate out to Vermonters so that they understand, when we hear about FEMA being cut or being investigated, FEMA also funds things like, our rural fire departments. They can access funding through FEMA programs, and those are for risk reduction. And if you think of FEMA, it really serves as a risk reduction and hazard reduction and NFIP, all of those programs that come out of FEMA are part of reducing risk, and whether that you call that climate resilience or climate change, that is the function of that federal program. So how we look at trying to fund these programs and projects, the community development block grants, community development block grants for disaster recovery, those are some of the funds that haven't been cut. And I wonder how you guys plan on communicating about funding needs, like what's your strategy there? And I think, Jane, you just mentioned that your communications person isn't on because they're on a vacation, so good for them. But yeah, just curious about that.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I might ask Marion or Evan, or if the treasurer is still on, also to follow up on anything specific about the resilience strategy. But I will drop in the chat just now our office, in collaboration with the state partners on the Interagency Advisory Board to the Climate Action Office for the last 2 years, because our office is fairly new, but as an ongoing operation of our office, assimilates a climate spending document on behalf of state government. And in fact, in response, we publish this in the fall of every year. We're currently working on that report for the fiscal year that we're currently in, fiscal year 26, to speak to what new investments the state's making around climate action. But last year we did that in the fall, and then with the transition in the federal government, acknowledged that many of the programs that both we've come to rely on as well as new funding were vulnerable to cuts and rollbacks. And so we reassessed our climate investments in the spring of last year and updated it in May of this year, I should say. And that report is something we're currently doing, and we try to put forward a narrative at the beginning that sort of sets the stage for state investment and how that state investment complements federal investment in our state around climate action. And so those vulnerabilities and that sort of risk right now of things that we might not have ever anticipated were at risk of being rolled back is something I imagine the Interagency Advisory Board will be looking to think about how we communicate this year in this report. And this is a report we make available to legislators, to decision makers, to administration officials, and then to the general public to think about how our state is moving forward around our own spending and what we can do in the face of changes at the federal level. So this is something that we feel has been really important to both communicate our state's significant investment in climate action, but then also feels even more important now as things become more vulnerable, and making sure people understand where we're at risk of losing funding that we've relied on.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Great. I'm going to grab Matthew, Sam, and then back to Nathaniel. Nathaniel, I promise I'm coming back. But Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, David, and the rest of the Climate staff, Climate Council of Vermont. Yeah, thank you. We're gonna bring it back to the subject of the budget and and the budget and finance. I think we're trying to. I think that was a topic I think we're talking about. Yes, if we had if this is just from my preference view, but also if this is a space preference view, I'm thinking, how can if we were, subject to a limited funding, as you may know, fundings get cut and we have to prioritize in government. The governor has to choose which program survives and which does not. Um, um, and the way I look at it is, I know what I would have picked in my three, and thank you for bringing up that, chart, about, prioritizing. If I had a magic wand, I would definitely think my bucket list would be making sure the government system doesn't fail, because that's agency systems. And if it fails, then we're held responsible for it. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter. Um, if I had to put the budget and money, getting the government systems and Vermont alert systems on up and running as soon as possible. So if there's any accountability and responsibility, that will be taken care of, because I know government agencies, if they fail, then you're held responsible for it, regardless of the problem. Um, that's what I'm thinking on my side. And third will be the roads and bridges. If I had to prioritize those, if I had I had to pick one, I'll definitely fix the government agency systems ASAP, that one, because ASAP, basically as soon as possible, because that does come into place of government accountability and responsibility. If that system doesn't, stand up to anything, then we're held responsible for it, and the government could be held definitely responsible for it. And that's supposed to be one that should never have to have have any problems. So if we had and it is for the rest of the client. If you had some sort of money, this is just a scenario that if you had this pot of money, we'll just say 50,000, and that's all. If you got and you had to prioritize it between three, or between one, which one would get the best outcome, which one would be the best investment, which one would you prioritize? They're all good, but if you had only a limited pot of money, which one would you best prioritize? I know I'll pick, and I'll be the government system, because I know government agencies is held responsible on a higher tier than all the others, because that's pretty much who we go to for any type of help or assistance. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Great. Sam, you dropped your hand. Are you all set?
I think I just will leave the longer comment in the chat already. I just wanted to emphasize, I think I saw Pat Moulton, I saw the folks from the Charlotte Library, and I guess just wanted to emphasize consistency, like anything that can simplify, that people can know that they can reliably go to the same place over and over again, whether that's for information on the individual level, information on the community level, and then also our municipalities for funding. Whether or not it has to change behind the scenes, that's a totally different story. But if they know the name of the program, and they know they can go there, and they can figure out with support from other normal partners how to get stuff done, I think that would really help also not only get projects done, but also help with psychological safety throughout the state, and in general, just expedite things. So I'll put a plug in for all of my towns are right now asking for better places. That's just a program that they just know the name of. It's catchy. Good job. But it's flexible. And so, I'll just make that really specific one. But in general, I'm just hearing the need for consistency and for communication, but on a project on information level. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate already seeing some of those recommendations taken on. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. That's great. Nathaniel, back to you.
Yeah, thanks for letting me ask a second question. Jane or Secretary Moore, are the cost estimates in the strategy, the 270 million upfront and the 95 million annually, are those sufficiently certain right now to serve as the basis for a cost recovery demand to the potentially responsible parties under the Climate Superfund Act? And if not, what work still needs to be done to get them there?
This is a completely separate project. The Climate Superfund law does reference the resilience implementation strategy as a place where, if we were successful in recovering damages from oil companies, that the money would go to funding. And it certainly informed our learning. I'm not sure if the treasurer is still on, but the treasurer's office is responsible in the Climate Superfund law for the development of the cost assessment. And that work is sitting with them. They have funds to do that, and that will be accomplished through a contractor over the course of the next year.
Thanks, Jane. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts before we do a final exercise here all together? Questions for Marion, Jane, Evan? Okay. So thanks, Evan. So what we'd love to do is a final exercise. Sometimes I call this the headline exercise. I think if you can click one more on that, Evan. Yeah, imagine we're in the future, 10 years in the future, and Vermont has another one of these climate, quote unquote, disasters. Something dramatic happens. But we've done the work. Vermont's done the work of effective resilience work, such as all these steps described in the resilience implementation strategy. And communities see the results. A little like Thomas said, of like, it stopped being a very expensive thing and a small thing because the investment was made. I would encourage all of you, just take a moment, think of your local paper or VT Digger, any newspaper or blog or whatever you want to call it. What would that headline read on the back end of this big climate event, this big flood, or this heat wave, or something along those lines? What does the headline look like when Vermont gets it right? Let's just take a moment. Get your inner journalist going here. Imagine a good headline that says, this is how we got it right. Just drop it right in the chat. Give folks a moment. Thanks, Marion. Thanks, Hannah. Sam, Lori, Jen. Thanks, Secretary Moore. State level efforts pay off. Thanks, Annette. Okay. Anything else folks want to share? Yeah, here we go. Nice, Nathaniel. Could have been worse. Love that. All right. A lot about communities gathering. That's really great. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Patricia. California does Vermont plan. Love that. Thanks. Nice, Eric. Yeah, Allison, thanks for that. Thanks, Ellie. All right. We have a slide on next steps, and I'd be happy to just push forward to that. And I don't know, Marion, if you want to do these, you want me to do these.
I'm happy to speak to it, and I'll keep
Okay.
it brief, knowing we wanted to wrap up around 1:50 here.
Yeah.
So fun. I love the newsletter headline activity, so love seeing those in the chat. So next steps, as we're sharing with you today, the strategy is out there. We love getting your feedback. We love thinking about future partnerships for implementation, and great questions folks have raised thus far about how we track it, how we implement, and how we continue to move this forward. Our office, in partnership with the steering committee of folks, it was discussions earlier around coordination with Vermont Emergency Management and the Recovery Office and other partners, all of us working together to think about implementation of this strategy. We are moving forward through myself and Evan and others in our office, advancement of some key early actions where we have some support and capacity to move some of those forward, and also lending support to other agencies and departments, other key implementers that you might see on those action cards on the website to start to move some of these priority actions forward. We are also coordinating to develop some policy proposals for legislative consideration, especially around some of the actions that relate to enabling programs and funding and other key changes that might need a legislative adjustment. I will note, the strategy and the actions within is really focused on an all hazards approach, really thinking about how we pull in and examine the climate hazards and impacts we are seeing in a state, and then prioritize our approach based on those. I will say, as we were developing this strategy over last year and early this year, a lot of our focus was on flooding, understandably so. Our state has experienced some dramatic flooding events. And so you'll notice a lot of the priority actions do really focus on flooding as a key climate-related hazard. That being said, we acknowledge needing to keep front of mind other climate-related hazards such as drought and wildfire. Secretary Moore spoke to these earlier. And again, really see this strategy as being able to adapt and adjust based on needs and climate hazards that we are facing as a state. And so as we move forward in implementation, we will be checking in on the priority actions on a biannual basis with the Treasurer's Office and with other partners who are helping in implementation, and then see ourselves checking back in every 4 years as well to do a broader revisit of the priorities here. And then to a question Allison had in the chat and Jane's response around our office leading some high-level tracking of climate action through our climate assessment tracker. We'll also be thinking about how we track implementation directly through the actions in the strategy, and then revisit on a biannual basis. And finally, I'll just say for the last bullet here, this is just the beginning in launching the strategy. Really hope folks through your organizations, your work with communities will stay engaged with us. Please visit our website, climatechange.vermont.gov/resilience, to explore that full list of actions, to do that deeper dive. Connect with us if you have ideas about implementation and partners. You can also access signing up for our newsletter through our website as well to stay engaged and informed on next steps. But with that, I'll hand it back to you, David, to wrap up today.
Thanks so much. All right, folks, let's end it here. Thank you all for being here, for engaging, for your very thoughtful headlines, and made me chuckle as well. And we're going to do this all over again Monday evening, I believe at 6 p.m. And it'll be a repeat of this, so there's no need to go again. However, we will be doing this again on Monday for folks who can't do this during the day and they really need an evening slot to have this conversation. Do stay in touch with the Climate Action Office. Marion showed you how. And thanks again for spending time with us today. That's it. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.